what have you learned about venture capital through Bitcoin? That's an incredible question. Well, so I guess I recognize the importance of approaching new technologies and founders with humility, like I mentioned at the beginning of the call. So, in Bitcoin, especially in Bitcoin's early days, the people promoting projects were sort of the folks that they were the outsiders and underdogs of other tech fields. They were people that didn't feel motivated or compelled by traditional tech and the business models that were sort of necessary to really create massive enterprise value in a traditional tech system. The folks that had sort of been disillusioned by that world were the folks that first came into Bitcoin. And so they didn't look, sound, or really communicate like traditional tech folks. And you have to be humble enough to be able to interpret what they're saying without being distracted by the fact that what they're saying it in a different way than a traditional tech founder would do. But once you could sort of get over that hurdle, then Bitcoin promotes a different business model. So if traditional tech is all about the aggregation of power and data, and that being directly related to the enterprise value a company can build, Bitcoin is sort of the opposite. Companies built on Bitcoin propose the opposite. So decentralization and scalability, I think, are positively correlated. So what I mean by that is you can get much greater scale if you have a truly decentralized system and if you're not promoting the traditional paradigm of tech, which is the centralization of power and authority and permissioning. And so, to sort of make that shift in how a VC sees the world, I think is critical to understanding Bitcoin. And I think a lot of what you see in the hype around altcoins and altcoin investing, DeFi investing, all of this is really about VCs with experience in the traditional tech world trying to apply the same principles and paradigm to a technology that's fundamentally different. And so you have to be able to, in Bitcoin, especially coming into Bitcoin as a new venture investor in the space, you have to be able to challenge your old assumptions, including the assumptions that prior made you money, right? So a lot of the folks in the venture capital world are, it's an older field, right? So it's folks in their 50s and 60s that have created great wealth in the world of the old paradigm. And Bitcoin is completely sort of, antithetical to that. And so to be able to give up the beliefs that you built a career on to try something new, I think is very challenging. And that created an opportunity for me, frankly, to come in and to offer, a solution for founders that wanted to work with someone that both understood venture capital and understood Bitcoin. And so there's very few opportunities to do that. And by the way, I just want to point out here that I think that all the founders that we've invested in, they all could succeed independently without venture capital investments and certainly without us. But what we're meant to do and what venture capital is meant to do is to provide the resources to help founders accelerate the growth they would otherwise have. So that's all we're doing. It's pretty simple. We're really a service provider to founders. But when founders want that extra accelerant, when they want to put gas on the flame, then we think that we can be one of the best or the best provider of that because we're grounded in this practice of traditional venture capital, which is meant to, promote founders and, help them scale, like I said before, but we also understand Bitcoin. And so hopefully what that means is that we can provide more signal, less noise, stay out of the way when it's important to, and, ultimately really help founders sort of avoid the problems that are obvious if you've worked with hundreds of companies that might not be obvious if you're on your first company or second or even third company. And so, I don't know if that was a direct response to your question. I think there's, I have a lot to think about in terms of what I've learned about venture capital through Bitcoin. But those are a few of the things that, I've learned or I'm trying to continue to learn. There's one other thing that, we promote at Stillmark, which is that in Bitcoin, when you're building, you're part of an open source, you're part of the open source community, whether you are directly contributing or not. So here's what I mean. In venture capital, you'll hear a lot of traditional VCs talk about when they back a company, it's all about finding the best team in a large market. You've probably heard that dozens of times. So it's about founders and market. True, but in Bitcoin, it's about something else. So it's about how that team and that market are related to the underlying protocol technologies that they depend on. And if what that team is building, both the business model and the product are consistent with the underlying technologies and the principles of the tech. And so there's this third piece that in order to do venture capital in the Bitcoin space, I think you have to get that piece right too. And my earlier example about payments tech in 2014 illustrates that point. So if in 2014 you're betting on a payments tech company that is promising Visa level scale, in absence of second layer technologies or even advancements at the core protocol level that make transactions lighter or increase throughput, you were sort of betting on a company and on a business model that wasn't possible given the underlying technology, the open source technology that company depended on. And then, by the way, there's this other nuance that's obvious to many, especially, you're one of the advocates of this, but the open source developers are not under the management or authority of the companies building upon the tech, right? That's something I think that, many folks, including traditional VCs, have sort of missed that really important nuance, is that even though the companies built on or alongside Bitcoin open source technologies depend on the tech, they don't have direct influence and certainly not authority over how that technology is developed. And so you sort of have to observe what the tech can do, what the roadmap looks like, be cognizant or really just actually, closely follow the developer discussions that are happening around the maintenance and advancement of these open source technologies. And you have to select for founders that know how to work under this sort of dynamic. So this is really specific to Bitcoin. I hope that it's one of the things that, that sort of defines what Stillmark does, is that we acknowledge that and get to know the open source technologies in the same way as if they were a direct part of the portfolio, even though they're not.